The more I love humanity in general, the less I love humans in particular. In my dreams, I often make plans for the service of humanity and would face crucifixion if it were necessary. Yet I am incapable of living in the same space with anyone for 2 days in succession. As soon as anyone is near me, their personality disturbs me and restricts my freedom. In 24 hours, I begin to hate the best of people, one because they've taken too long to eat dinner, or another for so frequently blowing their nose as the result of a cold. I become hostile to people the moment they come close to me. Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov. Although Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was completed just 3 years before the composer's death in March of 1827, the process that produced it began 30 years earlier. Beethoven first expressed an interest in setting Schiller's poem An die Freude, or Ode to Joy, shortly after arriving in Vienna as a 22-year-old in 1792. 2 years later, he wrote a cantata for solo voice and keyboard, Sigh of the Unloved and the Loved. This work begins with text lamenting the pain of unrequited love and ends with a rhapsody about the joy its requitement would inspire. This closing text is set to a tune Beethoven would use 16 years later in his choral fantasy, a melody he would then refashion in his Ninth Symphony that would become synonymous with the title of Schiller's poem. In addition to the choral fantasy, other steps along the path to the Ninth include sketches for a song setting of the Ode to Joy dating from 1798 and 99, and Beethoven's opera Fidelio, which was rendered in 3 different versions between 1804 and 1814, and includes lines from An die Freude that extol the redemptive powers of spousal love and loyalty. Sketches from 1811 and 12 reveal Beethoven experimenting with settings of the now iconic words Freude, schöne Goethefunken that begin Schiller's poem, and sketches from 1815 and 16 include the Scherzo's theme, as well as ideas for other movements. These sorts of intermittent attempts continued until early 1823, when Beethoven finally devoted himself fully to composing the Ninth Symphony. Such stubborn efforts over so many years inevitably raise questions regarding why the subject and themes in An die Freude, which uniformly emphasize the most lofty forms of human sociability, were so compelling to Beethoven, whose volatility in personal and professional relationships led most of his contemporaries to regard him as a misanthrope. In this regard, a look at the composer's personal history is useful. Beethoven was the son of a mediocre professional singer who fantasized about the fame and fortune that could be accrued from peddling his son around as another Mozart. Johann von Beethoven was also a raging alcoholic who would regularly abuse his son, frequently returning home in the middle of the night after hours of bar hopping and dragging his son out of bed to make the boy play for his drinking buddies. After Beethoven's mother died when he was 16, his father's alcoholism became so debilitating that the teenager successfully petitioned a court to become the legal guardian of his 2 younger brothers. When he finally left the family home to make his name in Vienna, he was burdened with a deep sense of shame about his upbringing that he hoped his musical abilities would allow him to transcend. Upon his arrival in the capital in 1792, he set about establishing his reputation as a virtuoso pianist by performing and improvising in the salons of the nobility, soon winning himself aristocratic patronage and the admiration of musicians. In addition to becoming a celebrated performer, he was writing music that, while sometimes being met with incomprehension, was still gaining him notice as someone who would certainly become a musician of the highest rank. But as the decade drew towards its end, Beethoven found this early success increasingly threatened by symptoms of hearing loss, which included ringing in his ears, trouble understanding speech, and difficulty hearing high-pitched sounds. All treatments were unavailing, and by 1801, Beethoven was 60% deaf. This deterioration continued until 1817, when his deafness became total. The particular tragedy of a musician losing their hearing is self-evident, but it was especially agonizing for Beethoven, who had embraced public performance and its social rewards as means of transcending the stigma of his childhood. He expressed this despair in a document written in 1802 that was found in his desk after his death, which has become known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. You who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me. Though born with a fiery, active temperament, even susceptible to the diversions of society, I am compelled to live life alone. If at times I try to ignore this, how harshly am I flung back by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing. Yet it is impossible for me to say to people, "Speak louder, shout, for I am deaf." How can I possibly admit an infirmity in the one sense which ought to be more perfect in me than others? My misfortune is doubly painful because I am bound to be misunderstood, and I must live like one who has been banished. If I approach near to people, a hot terror seizes upon me, and I fear being exposed. What a humiliation it was when someone standing next to me heard a flute in the distance, and I heard nothing. Or someone standing next to me heard a shepherd singing, and again, I heard nothing. Beethoven's difficulties with human relationships were certainly conditioned by a combination of his personal history, his natural temperament, and a profound disability. And yet Beethoven somehow always managed to turn his personal defeats into artistic victories. His greatest music is characterized by an impulse to both confront and ultimately transcend the inherent hardships of human existence, and in doing so, giving his best self a fullness of expression that was impossible for him to achieve in his personal life. Beethoven's music can be dramatic, stormy, and even angry, but it is never bitter or cynical. In spite of all his suffering, his art is vigorously and profoundly life-affirming. The Ninth Symphony, for all its dynamic majesty, is also a deeply personal work that expresses Beethoven's fervent desire to break through his isolation and form bonds with humanity that his deafness and temperament so often forestalled. The decades-long path that led to its creation provides us with an eternal example of a great artist's indispensable urge and ability to articulate our highest aspirations in the most compelling forms, and to bring forth what Lincoln memorably called the better angels of our nature.